that's okay. But for me, I want to learn what's joined up, what's not in the book, what's the stuff that's in the bin, what's the stuff that gets thrown away. We don't do that in our anatomy. And so, like,
I'm here with a really good colleague of mine, and as he's called me, my old sparring partner, and I think that we still continue to be that way. And this guy has been a huge influence in my work, in my life, with what I've studied with anatomy and dissection. And I really can't thank him enough, actually, for the work that he's done for me in having me question myself with everything that I do with my own work and practice. So I'm really pleased to introduce my good friend and colleague and sparring partner, work colleague, and fun mate, Julian Baker. Welcome.
Hi, Gary. Thank you for that amazing introduction. Wow. I had no idea.
I could keep going. I could keep going for ages on that one. Julian, the reason I kind of run these sessions is I just want to, people hear about you a lot when I'm teaching, and not everyone gets to meet you. So, I've been interviewing various people like this, and you come up a lot when I'm teaching and talking, and I'm also promoting your work a lot too. And they never really get to meet you. So this is an opportunity for people to find out about Julian Baker and, where he came from, what got you where you are now? What started you off on this whole journey?
I want to say two things. Firstly, Gary, you come up in my teaching. I quite often show your slings, and so that's quite often I think I say, Gary can't do these things, and you also with your story about the scalpel as well with your dissection. But I do want to ask you a question. What was the year of the original Anatomy Act? Gary, so the original Anatomy Act. He goes, oh, hang on, I know this.
Yeah, but I'm going to always say 1862, but it's not.
1832, and he always said,
see, that's right.
We had a lot of fun in the lab. We've had a lot of fun doing lots of things, and I've missed you so much. This is the longest time I've been not actually sort of seeing you in person. So to see you, in this is great. Although, as I said to you before, it's kind of weird. If I look down, my camera and my computer are separate. So if I do look down at any stage, it's because I can't see Gary when I'm looking at the camera. But so my starting point, I started out back in the day, back in 1988, 89. I learned the Bowen technique in Australia. And so for those of you that don't know about Bowen, it's very soft, very light, very gentle technique. And it fixed my shoulder. I had this chronic shoulder that I had for years. It used to be in acute sessions every few weeks. And it transformed really. And I thought, wow, I should learn this. So I'd done some reflexology and bits and pieces. I was a chef originally. That's what I was doing in Australia. I was running a large resort. And so yeah, I learned Bowen, and it sort of went from there. And I came back. I brought Bowen back to the UK in '93, and I say '93. Pedaled it around 92, I think it came back, because Piers was born 93. Pedaled it around for 2 years, just got nowhere with it. If anybody worries about competition and thinks, oh, I want the original thing, that's the harder thing. Go where there are existing people, because the groundwork has already been done. So pedaling Bowen around for that period of time was just a nightmare. So 2 years, and then I got a break. Jane Alexander in the Daily Mail wrote about Bowen, and suddenly we had 10,000 letters, in the space of 3 months. It was just bizarre. It's an amazing story. So that then kicked me off, and I didn't really, my anatomy wasn't great. I didn't really know what I was doing. I had books and stuff. The training that I originally got was terrible in terms of body and placement of what we did. And slowly but surely, I started to learn a bit more anatomy. And then a colleague of mine in Holland, a wonderful man called Hans Tyson, started to talk about fascia, and I hadn't really heard about that very much. And so I heard about that, and then in 2005 or 6, I think I was in New York with Tom Myers. I sort of tracked these people down to try and teach me. I know nothing. It was just I wanted to find good teachers, people who know better than me, and I want to take those ideas and see whether they fit with me. And some of them stay on board, and some of them don't. And I was sort of I was stalking Tom Myers at that time. And so I was in New York, and Leslie Kaminoff from the Breathing Project, some of you may have heard of, mentioned Gil Hedlund, and I hadn't heard about Gil. So I went online. Back in those days, it was still, even in 2006, online wasn't online like it is now. And I ordered his DVDs from America, and it just changed my life, and that was it. And I booked on to go to San Francisco with Gil, did 6 days with Gil. And I said to him, do you want to come to the UK and teach? And he went, yeah, sure. Because he said that to everybody. He learned that everybody would say, do you want to come to Afghanistan and teach? And he'd go, yeah, why not? In the sure and certain knowledge that he'd never hear from him again. So, he didn't know me. So I already had it lined up. So I said, great. So a few months later, I said, you're coming over. We brought him over. I did a dissection with Tom Myers as well in St. George's before that. And that was it. Sort of 2007 or 2008, I think Gil came over. And we sort of talked together, and I coordinated his classes, taught him why. I booked the classes, he sort of taught me. And then we sort of got that going. So that's been sort of, what's that, 12 years or something like that. 12, 13 years. And then I started to teach by myself, and I've been running dissection classes. And I think the thing for me was that the anatomy that we learn in a book, you look at a picture in a book and you go, right, there's that muscle, and you think you're touching that muscle. And really, when I got into the dissection lab, it was like, it's nothing like what it is that we're seeing in a book. It's not even closely resembled. And so, what's connected? And so I found that anatomy didn't really follow any logical physics, if you like. We talk about the idea of extension and contraction extension, and we talk about agonist and antagonist. And so we say that here is the opposite reaction to the bicep is an opposite reaction to a tricep. Well, kind of it is, but in physics you've got a load of other things going on as well. So if you're going to change the position of your hand and your elbow, you've also got to compensate for that in terms of an energetic transfer through your head, or maybe the opposite side. And anatomy doesn't really allow for that. It's very isolationist, and it's very reductionist, and it looks at parts of the body and studies those parts of the body and doesn't really put it all back together. And I think that's really what my thing is about. It's about putting this anatomy back together, not for doctors because they don't really need it, but for guys like you and the movement people and the people that need to understand how relationships work and how those biomechanics work.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting you say that, because from my kind of varied backgrounds in the work that I was always doing in teaching movement work, and also my manual therapy, was always finding a way to sort of teach movement in a way that would have someone understand their anatomy as joined up writing, rather than, as separate pieces. And then, of course, when you and I kind of collided, when we met, you were the person you were in the field doing that and bringing that language to the people.
Yeah.
And, for us, for me especially, it was a beautiful blend as to how we could both find a way to together that way.
The thing is that it's not me that is it's not me that's doing anything that isn't already there. That's the thing. It's like you met John Webster, and John is a remarkable human in many respects. I'm not going to go into it, but he's an ice carver. If you knew that John, you remember John Webster, Big John from and he shows you these pictures of these amazing swans that he's carved out of ice. And you say, John, how do you carve a swan out of ice? He goes, hey man, I'm doing him a massive disservice by taking this accent. Well, all you do is you take some ice and you cut away everything that doesn't look like a swan. Okay, and it kind of makes sense in many respects, but the same thing goes for anatomy. Is that what we do is we focus on stuff like, say, for example, the iliotibial band, which is part of a structure that goes around the leg, which is a fascia lata, and the iliotibial band is joined onto that, but you never see that in the book. So what you do is you cut away all the stuff that doesn't look like an iliotibial band, and you leave the iliotibial band behind, the swan effectively, and then you create this structure. Now the problem from that isn't the name of the structure or the fact that it's been carved away or anything else. The problem with that is that you now create issues around it. So you can only have a problem with something if you've got a name for it. So now we've got, iliotibial, ITB, a tight IT, a tight ITB. because we've seen it in the book. And now we create loads of treatments for it, or movements for it, or bits of kit for it, or foam rollers for it, or whatever in God's name you're going to do with it. But really what you've got to bear in mind is that it doesn't exist. There is no ITB in isolation. It's part of a network. And part of that network is the fascia lata, but the fascia lata is also the dividing structures for the leg, for the muscles of the leg. So yeah, it's joined up, but anatomy doesn't join that up. So we have to consider that. Because we don't consider it, our starting point for anything we do is always going to be missing something at best and potentially wrong at worst.
Something that I think has been really quite profound is, hang on a sec. So after coming out of a lab experience, the moment we go back into treatment and working with students in terms of movement, the whole dynamic changes completely. We're looking at a body and thinking, you know what, I've got no clue now what I'm looking at. And that was, I mean, my first dissections were with Todd Garcia in Austria, in the Institute of Anatomy out there, in similar years to when you started. And it was already beginning to shift my understanding. Working with you had a very different take to it, because we dove in such different ways that, of course, it had me question everything I thought I knew in the first place, even from when I first went into labs. And that actually made it really exciting. So there's a moment where things get a little bit scary, because all of a sudden I'm doubting the fact that I did learn something in the past. Maybe I should just go back to being a graphic designer. And then all of a sudden, something else starts to come into my vision. Thanks. Something else starts to come into my vision.
You know what, this is the thing, and I think, what I'm not, I don't claim to be really. I mean, I call myself it sometimes because is an anatomist or a functional anatomist. Todd's an amazing anatomist, Gil's an amazing anatomist, but what neither of those guys are practicing hands-on body workers. And so for me, I come at it from the perspective of, how I'm seeing these things presenting in a clinic. I mean, I don't have much of a clinic these days, but certainly used to on a regular basis, but I teach it. I'm saying I'm having to justify why are we working a knee or a pelvis in relation to a shoulder or body reading, all this kind of stuff. And so I'm coming at it from the perspective of trying to find connections which will translate back into function. There's no point cutting something open. If you want to cut a body open and learn the anatomy, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And there's a lot of universities that are now going to places where you don't cut a body up, because they're saying, well, you don't need to. You can learn everything from a book. That's another story. But from a functional perspective, you want to cut a body open and just learn it, that's okay. But for me, I want to learn what's joined up, what's not in the book, what's the stuff that's in the bin, what's the stuff that gets thrown away. We don't do that in our anatomy. And so, like, for example, I talk about these slings, I talk about these, can we dissect them? And sure, and so you've gone and done these dissections. It doesn't mean to say that they're functional, but it means to say that we can start to think of the body in a different way. We can start to look at the way that we move, or other people move in a more joined up way. And we can start to say, there isn't, so classical anatomy doesn't allow for a sling yet, but I've cut that thing out of the body. So I know that it's possible. I know that it's there, and it's no more or less reliable or what's the word, viable or valid than any other piece of muscle that's cut out of the body. We just have to, we've adopted classical anatomy as being the beginning and the end in relation to the body, and it's not. There's massive amount in terms of function that's missing from our anatomy, from our classical anatomy, and it's not anywhere. It just doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's the great thing with you, Julian, is that the fact that you actually gave me the space to kind of keep repeating that over and over again for my research.
It's something else now.
Yeah, okay, but it was great because it also didn't allow me to get attached to it too much. It was the fact that, there was this thing that could be created, but you could create anything in the same way that you've said, well, I think Robert Schleifer said to you, I want to see the nuchal ligament. And you said, well, yeah, I can go and make it for you. And he looked quite surprised when you said, make it. And then you came back with, I can make an Eiffel Tower out of that, because you can go in and cut what you want. This is the thing.
This is the thing about anatomy trainers, and I got collared in Berlin a couple of years ago by the CEO of Anatomy Trains, and she said, "You're the one who doesn't believe in anatomy trains." And I'm, well, produce the evidence, show it to me, and the belief is neither here nor there. Science isn't interested in your belief. It's interested in, oh yeah, we've cut them out. All right, dead enough person, a sharp enough knife, I can cut you out a unicorn from a shoulder blade. Fairly straightforwardly. It doesn't mean to say that there's unicorns in the body. It means to say that, you know, you've managed to cleverly cut that line. Michael Watson was talking, a therapy expert a couple of years ago. So he said, you know, with greater dissection techniques, maybe lasers will be able to cut these in even finer. Like, well, hang on a minute. You know, he said two things. He said, firstly, when you get into a dead body, there's stuff that, you know, it's not there anymore. Like, well, what's happened to it? Has it just disappeared? What does that mean? And secondly, if you're cutting something so finely with a laser and then lining up a therapy or a theory around it, is that functional? I don't think so. You know, so I think Tom is a genius, and I wouldn't be where I am today without Tom Myers. But anatomy trains, they are imaginary lines, and they're brilliant imaginary lines to think about how the body joins up and to look at it in a different way. And I remember Tom saying to me when I first learned anatomy trains from me, he said, learn the lines and forget about them, you know, because they're not real, they're just imaginary. And when you start to create a reality around something, which has happened a little bit with anatomy trains, it becomes a bit of a problem. So yeah, we can cut anything out. And this is what I said to you, you know, you've created those incredible chains through the glute and into the lower back, and they demonstrate connectivity. They don't demonstrate function, but they do demonstrate connectivity, and they do demonstrate the fact that the stuff is joined up. And then from there, we can then start to understand that, well, is there a relationship? And we can establish whether there is or whether there isn't by different ways of testing these things. But the starting point is to do our dissection, our anatomy in a way that is different and hasn't been done before. And yeah, it's not a popular way of thinking amongst classical anatomists.
No, exactly. And, you know, as we've seen, we can keep dissecting and find all sorts of different routes around the body. And, you know, you just follow the tissue. It's a bit like peeling an apple and just keeping the core coming off. You know, you could do that with the body and just take that right the way down from the skin to the bone and back out again. It's a very different way to approach it.
I think the trouble also is over the, you know, and I've been guilty of this myself, is that, you know, I've perpetuated the idea of these layers, you know. And when I learned from Gil, we took the skin off and we looked at the skin and how amazing that was, and the circles on the underside of the skin. We talked about that. I mean, there was a session in San Francisco a few years ago, there for 3 weeks. And we spent 3 days talking about these circles under the skin. And like, what are they for? Well, in the speculation, and Gil still speculates about that. And I'm here to tell you, there are no circles under the skin. They don't exist. They only exist as a remnant of the knife cutting through something. You know, it's like saying, you know, what are those spaces where the pips are in the apple core? Well, just where the pips sit. You know, they're not, you know, don't read anything into it. And the circles on the other side of the skin are where the collagen fibers that hold the superficial fascia, the adipose tissue in place, connect to the skin. But once you cut them away, you leave these circles. There's nothing special about them. They are the connection to the collagen fibers. And I've changed my way of thinking and trying to stop the layer idea. I'm not going to take large swathes of superficial fascia away anymore. And look at that, because it's been done and it doesn't mean anything. The potential is that it perpetuates this idea of separate structures. I'm really keen to sort of pedal back a little bit on that and go down a different route. There's a video of mine on Vimeo about connecting the layers that I put out for the British Fascist Symposium, so about £7. You can go and rent that. But yeah, so I'm trying to sort of trying to get people to have more joined up thinking, not in lines of strain, but through from front to back and back to front, that there isn't any separation. That we talk about the viscera, and we get to a day where we dissect the viscera, and the viscera is a subject. Well, actually, you know, all that stuff is linked up through things like the psoas and the diaphragm and through the neck, and ends up in your brachial plexus. So, you know, how do we portray that and demonstrate that, and how do we then translate that into things like functional movement or yoga or manual therapy? And that's the challenge. And I don't know necessarily how it's going to work over the next few years, but I have some ideas.
Yeah. So I mean, because I think about this a lot when we're in a situation together in a lab, and that the kind of the new way of trying to explore the anatomy through, say, fascial dissection and what have you, is almost in danger of becoming anatomized itself again in just a very different way. So, you know, I mean, I think some of the dissections, how do we get that creative to explore the connectivity in such different ways than the ways that have recently been dissected? It's already changed people's thinking, which is the thing that kind of led me just to look at those other structures, because it's just another way of looking at the same thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the absolute way.
Yeah, I think it's one of my criticisms of the fascia world is that, and I've got Robert Schleip on my webinar next Tuesday, and so that's Tuesday the 6th of October, 8 p.m. British Summer Time. So join us for Robert.
I interviewed him recently.
Yeah. And it's one of my criticisms of fascia is that fascia has been adopted by the movement world and the complementary therapy world as some kind of miracle, and it's been sort of obsessed and idealized and all kinds of ideas around fascia, like fascia release and stretching fascia and, you know, fascial fitness and fascial hydration. And people are focused on this idea of fascia. And actually, you know what? It's a connective tissue, and it's interesting. It's poorly described. It's not really given much of a focus in relation to how it joins up. But there's a lot of stuff in anatomy that doesn't. But to fantasize about fascia as being the answer to things, I think is unhelpful. Really, the main thing you need to know about fascia is that it's mostly non-cellular, it's mostly inert. It's a scaffold that allows space. You know, it's a space creator. It's like, you know, you put a spacer into something. What does that allow? It allows movement through it and around it. It allows nutrients to come to force it. It gives stability. It allows strength. It allows muscle to move in and out between it. Can you release it? No. Can you change it with your hands? No. I mean, what does even release mean? So we have all these words that we sort of, you know, we focus on, and I'm not sure, as I said, if that helpful. And nobody else outside of our obsession about fascia really cares. So you know, that's the danger. It's the danger about anything else is that when we obsess about one structure at the expense of everything else, you know, we lose focus and it becomes part of the buzzword that we have, like the core or style.
Interesting with, you know, because as you know, I've been involved in the plastination project, and on the full body form, I was the lead dissector and designer of that body. But the thing that was really interesting with that process is that, you know, for 6 months, we've got the same form and we're keeping the tissues for as long as we can to eventually be plastinated, where, you know, as we would know in our environments in dissection, we would go from skin down to as much as we can get down to within a period of days, whether that be, you know, your 6 days or 10 days or the 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, is that at some point that's reduced down.
Yeah.
And we were going through a process of having to keep preserving. And the interesting thing with it is that removing structures from the fascial tissues, the fascia was as good as useless in that moment, because it weakens, it's not strong, it's almost as, it's dependent upon the tissue it's part of.
Yeah,
everything's codependent that way.
Here's the thing about fascia. There is no fascia in the same way there's no iliotibial band. Fascia doesn't exist as an independent structure. It's part of a network of other things. And so when we talk about fascia as a whole, what are we talking about? You know, when you dissect out the fascia, are you dissecting out the collagen fibers that hold the superficial fascia, the adipose, in place? Well, I'm guaranteeing pretty much you're not. So fascia is a combination of things that start with epi, peri, and endo. So epimesium, perimesium, endomesium, and those form the basic structures of every single other bit of tissue that holds it in place. So what are we talking about? The aponeurosis is the shiny white fibers are the thing that tend to people think about when they think about fascia. But that's probably 25% of the fascias of the body, that we're probably less, that we're talking about. So this has been my issue, is that, you know, when we dissect that out or we plastinate it and we go, here's a plastination of the fascia of the body, here's a plastination of a bit of connective tissue. That's it. So I'm not, you know, pouring, not pissing on your chips, as they say in Australia, but as long as we keep that in mind, is that it's fascinating, it's interesting, and I can't see the end result. But you're looking at a small percentage of what we would call collagen, fibrous, connective tissues, and there's lots of different categories that will go into it, dense elastic, and dense regular, dense irregular, all these things, but they're all fascia.
So I just want to back up on something here. You started as a chef, didn't you? Your whole your professional life, was it?
Sounds like, where were you on the night of the 13th?
There's an interesting element with you. I mean, there's a nature about you that I've always admired as well. But I mean, you're a fantastic cook, and I've loved being around you. We've been around each other in your cooking environment, as it were. But I've also seen that when we've been in the lab, you've just understood something about tissue and the way that you've managed the situation, handled it, and the way you speak about it. And when I heard that you had been a chef in the past, I thought, there's a lot of skills that have been transferred.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I did a butchery ticket. I was very fortunate to do an apprenticeship with an amazing chef, manager, director called Richard Shepherd at a restaurant called Langan's Brasserie in London, and owned by Peter Lang. I've got a picture of Peter on my wall here. And it was an incredible big place because it was an old-fashioned, what they call a party system, not party, but as in, you had the veg section, the grill section, the hors d'oeuvres, and we had a butchery section. So we used to do all our own butchery. And so I did a lot of the butchery and the fishmongery and learned those cuts across the board, and stocks, and it was amazing training. And so the thing about butchery is, we give names to things, like we call it lamb or beef or pork, which is pig, cow, and sheep. Got the order wrong. So when you say here is a best end of lamb, what are you talking about? The best end of lamb is those sort of cutlety bits. Well, you're talking about ribs, and you're talking about a bit of what would be, I don't know, let's call it the erector spinae. So once you take the sheep and you cut it into bits and pieces, you then label those bits and pieces with the cuts. You talk about best end of lamb, saddle of lamb. If you cut it two ways, it's a Barnsley chop, and so on and so forth. And we have these different names for it. And the same thing goes for anatomy, but all we do is exactly the same. In butchery, we take the animal apart, label that, call that a cut. And in anatomy, we take the animal apart, this instance the human, and we label it and we call it that. They're not God-given names. They're not God-given functions. They're just named, labeled parts. And so, I learned to take an animal apart fairly quickly. And I know that this sounds a bit gruesome, but it's no different. A human is just another animal on the table. Yeah, it's a way of looking at it in a whole way. For an animal, you have to prepare it in a way that's whole, and then you break it down into its component parts. In anatomy, we tend to do the opposite way around. We tend to look at those component parts. We don't put the whole thing back together again. Yeah. So yes, knife skills. Generally speaking, whether it's a mushroom or a courgette or taking the skin off of a duck or a human. The knife skills are there, and I've brought those into the lab with me. They're just inherent with that. And then working with groups, running a kitchen and so on and so forth. So it's been part of my life, in terms of that is a permeation of who I am. I'm a very physical and sensate person. So, for example, cooking is the best training for manual therapy you can get, because cooking, the definition of cooking is that something is changing underneath your hands as you're cooking it. You stir it, you make a roux and you stir it, changes. The heat transforms it. We change proteins, that's what egg whites are, we change the proteins. So it changes, you make a hollandaise sauce. You have to be at the right place with the egg yolks before you can add the melted butter, and the melted butter hasn't really too hot, too cold, otherwise it curdles. And so you're feeling those textures underneath your hands constantly. So going into manual therapy and then going into dissection, which is all about feeling the changes in textures, was sort of a natural progression. I think that, if there was a belief in the universal direction, that I had to go through my chef's training in order to become a manual therapist, and in order to become then an effective dissector.
Yeah, well, that makes absolute sense. And one thing I will kind of cover in this as well, because you're talking about the elements of the butchery and stuff like that, and then this not too different from the animal to the human, is that when we're in a lab with you, nothing's treated that way. I mean, there's an absolute utmost respect for the donor form, the donor family, and it's one of the most awe-inspiring processes to go through, and you lead people into that in such a beautiful way. I know Gil has his own methods of doing that, but you brought Julian Baker into the way that you do that, and it's a profound process to go through, and every move, every cut, every touch it always means something. There's something quite profound in every single moment that we do, and this is one thing that you're great at, is you have the individual just pull themselves back and respect the thing that they're just about to remove, because otherwise, when it's gone forever, and we lose what that's about. And how these things come to an end when the whole process closes is full of respect all the way through. So I just want to make sure that that's understood when this goes out.
Every day, thank you, Gary, every single day, it's like, okay, just remember that we're working on somebody that's given you their body in order for you to learn on. How amazing is that gift? This is our kind teacher. This is a teacher. We treat this person with the same respect as we would our teacher, our guru. They are giving us access, and access all areas past to their body because they didn't need it anymore. Wow, what an amazing gift that is. And we dedicate that to the benefit, like in Dharma, we dedicate our merit, we dedicate our opportunity to learn from this to the benefit of all the people that we might be able to help in the future. And so the most important people in dissection room are the donors. We look after them, we name them. We are the last people to see them. We give them. They don't have a funeral. We are their funeral. We are their wake. We are their send off, if you like. And it's a glorious send off. And the process itself is fairly, I wouldn't say violent, but it's rough. It's destructive. We're taking somebody apart, but at the same time, we're doing it with awe and wonder and love. And you stand at the end of 6 days, and you give a send off to those donors, and there isn't a dry eye in the house because we've loved them literally. We've fallen in love with their anatomy and their bodies, and we remember them. It's an incredible thing. Part of the respect is we go into any institution that we work in, we clean at the end of every day. We clean our instruments, we clean the tables, we clean the spaces that we use. At the end of the week, we scrub it down, and we have places going, oh, we've got technicians do that. So we do that because that's our offering, if you like, to the institution, the donors, and a sign of our respect. So it's respectful, it's loving, it's kind. And I'd like to extend that one of these days by having people that we've kind of got to know and that we extend their life into the lab. And I want to have a program where we get to learn about them, or we video them while they're alive, and we find out what their loves and their likes were and the sport they played. And people sort of have this sort of think, well, that's a bit weird. And maybe I'm weird because I don't think that. But when my Auntie Joan died, she had so much surgery, and I knew her so well. I would love to have extended my love to her by learning from the incredible thing that was her body. And John Hunter was somebody that would dissect a lot of people after their death and do postmortems back in the 18th century. So nobody's done it. Nobody's done this sort of living investigation of people to then dissect them when they're dead. And I think it would be an incredible thing to do. We learn so much.
I think that's a really powerful point. You mentioned this to me before, and I think in terms of a learning tool for people, it's so powerful because you do get to understand someone's movement pattern, how they've been going about just their everyday life. Because I know you're big on functionality, and just the simple functionality of if someone's struggling with movement around the house, then why don't they put their cups higher up in another shelf in the kitchen and stuff like that, and then something further down, so they've got to go up and bend down and go up and bend down. We would understand so much more about elements of their life, how they've complained about maybe aches and pains and things like that. That, of course, once their body's been donated to that process, that would be a whole level of data.
Yeah, I mean, somebody says, oh, I've had this shoulder pain that I can't lift my shoulder up for 20 years. And we video that, and we see their restriction. And when they're dead, we then go and we compare one shoulder to the other. Well, I mean, that in itself is mountains of data that we can understand what the connective tissue has laid down, and also the relationship that's then happened, what's gone into the neck. We can look at the biomechanics of their movement. We can look at their wrist, their elbow. Has it affected them? You know, and there's so much that we can learn just from simple bits of information. And you know, my plan is this is going to happen one day. That we're going to, and I've taken this proposal. What we need people to sort of step up and fund a lab. We need a private lab to do it in, and you know, hopefully in the next year or two we'll have that. But so we're looking for people that can help to either donate, even if it's a couple £100, you know, to put into a crowdfunding. And I really want somebody that's a great project manager who wants to come and lead the crowdfunding project, because I'm rubbish with that kind of finances stuff. So somebody would lead a project, and I think we'd have a lab in a year's time. It would be a very straightforward process. It's not going to happen within our current climate of academic thinking in this country. You know, we are not going to get allowed into any lab in this country again, because the academics say, well, we don't want you people. We, you know, go away. We want classical anatomy. We want to teach our undergraduate medical students this anatomy that we've learned for the same 300 years, and nothing will change. So until we do it ourselves, it won't happen. So functionality is what it's all about. You know, why do we have epidemic proportions of back pain? You know, people, it's the biggest cause of loss of hours to industry in the Western world, back pain, you know, non-specific lower back pain. And it's second only to mental illness, which is stress, but pain and stress go together. So why do we do that? Because I think one of the main reasons, not the main reason, one of the main reasons is we don't teach an understanding of joined up anatomy. We don't teach the relationship of the head to the lower back. You know, I know it sounds obvious, but your head weighs 14 pounds. If you move it around, it's going to change the way that you load your back. If you don't think that it's accepted, let me give an example. I was speaking to a major racing team. I'm not going to name names, but I was speaking to major racing teams, and they talk about the head and the G forces that are on head. So you accelerate off the grid, and I don't know, you know, 0 to 60 and something ridiculous, but there are incredible G forces on the body. So they talked a lot about measuring the G forces on the neck and the head and so on and so forth. And I said, so what do the results show on the seat and the lower back? And like, what? Well, what forces then get transferred into the sacrum and the lower back? I don't know. Well, what measuring have you done of that transference of that force from the head down through those spinal muscles into, say, thoracolumbar fascia, and then dispersal of that force? It was bizarre. It's like, hang on, you're spending millions, I mean, millions and millions and millions on a driver and a car, but you're only looking at one bit in relation to the application of the forces on that. Well, those forces are transferable. That's the laws of physics. But because they're doing it from an anatomy perspective, nobody's thought about it.
It's interesting because the way that they would consider the mechanics, they would understand the stresses and strains around the whole vehicle. I used to race cars when I was younger with a friend of mine, and we used to bodybuild at the time because we were making sure that we could maintain our fitness to manage the forces of the car when we were driving it.
Yeah. Yeah.
A couple of kids that are just doing their thing, but understanding that we were working with our own bodies and also building a car. So the two things had to work together.
So, I mean, you have your hand on whatever wheel it is. I think you take the wheels out of a racing car and you raise your shoulders. Well, it transfers force into your mid back and lower back. It's not rocket science. It's not even mechanical engineering. It's basics. But because the driver is considered from an anatomical perspective, not an engineering perspective, and the two don't come together, you end up with this disconnect. Does it make a difference? I don't know. I have no idea whether it would make a difference whether you would study that in the racing car driver. I don't. How would you then translate that? Well, that's not my job. My job is to say, well, look, your head weighs 14 pounds if you take it alone. So you're going to have to disperse. Look, imagine you've got a bowling ball of 10 or 12 pounds. You know, we've all been 10-pin bowling at some stage, and you've got a bowling ball of 10 or 12 pounds. That's the weight of your head. Now imagine taking a broomstick and balancing that bowling ball on a broomstick. Oh, that's tricky. So I'm going to give you some gaffer tape, some duct tape, whatever you want to call it, and I'm going to get you to strap that bowling ball onto that broomstick. Yeah. And now imagine how much, and make it stable so it doesn't move around. And imagine where you would have to put that. But now move the bowling ball so that it's sort of 2/3 forwards and 1/3 back. And now make the bowling ball so that it can move and rotate and jump up and down and not fall off the broomstick. You see what we're looking at in terms of the forces required in order to make sure that our head stays stable. It's just enormous.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Julian, so what's next for you? What's you know, because I know we're living in this sort of COVID times right now, but have you got plans for your future?
Well, so 1st of April, I've been running a series of webinars. You can find those on the functionalfascia.com website. And what I tried to do in the beginning of lockdown was to sort of keep things cheap. So I put out a load of webinars which were based on a lot of the dissections and pictures that I've done, you know, the dissections, pictures and videos that I've done over the last couple of years. So there's loads of specific subjects on deep fascia, superficial fascia, shoulders, and what have you, and they're all on the website. But it struck me from the 1st of April, because you know my business finished, was that we can now communicate in a different way. And my focus has always been to bring people into the lab and to give them this experience, this hands-on experience of dissection. And what I realize now is that actually we can broaden that out. So I think probably now is the time to tell you this, but I'm going to be running a live dissection. You're the first to hear it. It's a live dissection. It's going out on the 9th of November. It's going to be 6 days, the 9th to the 14th. That's Monday to Saturday. It's going to go out around 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, British summertime. Actually, it's going to be GMT because the clocks will have gone back by then. It's going to go out about 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. And I'm going to be focusing on showing everybody for over 2 or 3 hours of an evening, the skin, the superficial fascia, the muscular structures, and looking at the tissues that we all work with. We're not going to do a huge amount on going down into the viscera or getting into the brain or stuff like that, but we're going to be looking at the TMJ, the neck. We're going to look at the hip, the glutes, the thoracolumbar fascia. We're going to be doing that for 2.5 hours every single day, going out 6 days, for 6 days from the 9th to the 14th of November. So that's the next thing. I'm really nervous and excited about it. Each session will be recorded and put up into a membership section each evening. So everybody that sort of signs up for it will be able to watch that forever. It's going to stay up there. There's no annual fees. It's just a one-off fee. And I'm putting that out at £150 for 6 days. In addition to the 6 days, you also get all the previous webinars from the previous April, May, June, July, August, September. So there's 6 months of webinars. So there's about 25 webinars out there, and they're worth about 300 quid anyway, £200 anyway. So that goes in part of the deal. And I'll give your group a discount. So we'll create a discount code. So contact me or contact Gary for that discount code, and I'll give you, I don't know, £25 off. So you have £125 for all the webinars and all the 6-day dissection. Why is it cheap? It's cheap because I want people to see it. I think it's important. I want people to join in, ask questions. I want people to rethink the way they think about the body. I really want people to be excited by this thing that we're doing. So yeah, that's my next thing. And we can put this out around the world. I think it's going to be, I'm really excited. And that's
really exciting. Amazing. Well, great. I mean, good luck with that. You've also, just going to throw this in, you've written the book, which is the Bow and Unraveled. I'm holding that up on the screen right now.
How lovely. Thank you. That's my second book. My first book was it's out of print now. This one's going out of print soon as well. So we'll have to do a 3rd edition. I have got copies. If you can't get it online, then let Gary know. I have got copies available for about £10 or something like that if you want to.
And you're also co-authors, weren't we, with our friend Linus Johansson's movement integration book as well.
Yeah.
You've done a lovely piece in that too, which is always interesting to read.
I had a chapter in Robert Schleip's book, Fascial Dysfunction, edited by Leon Chateau. It wasn't Robert's book. So that was on again with Bowen, and a bit about superficial fascia in Linus's book. So that's been an adventure. I've actually got a webinar with Robert next week, next Tuesday, the 6th of, I think I mentioned that already, 6th of October, which is an hour and a half with Robert, talking about fascia in sport and movement. So a specific subject for that matter as well. But yeah. Oh, by the way, on the, I don't know if this is of interest to anybody, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to release a very limited release of people, because for people to have access to me all week during this dissection. So there'll be a Facebook group specifically. There's only going to be about 40, 50 people in this, and there'll be a WhatsApp group, a Facebook group. I'll be doing Facebook Lives to that group. Your questions will get priority. It's a little an access all area. You get into Julian's head. Good luck with that. And that's an extra £100 on top of the 150 or 125 pounds in your case, sort of access fee, if you like. So hopefully if that kind of thing interests you and you really want to sort of see a little bit more about the adventure, about the journey, because there's a lot of things that's happening in terms of actually getting to this point. So it's going to be a very, very interesting, the next 2 months, if you like, the next 6 weeks is going to be very interesting in terms of how I get to this point where we can run this dissection. So yeah, join me on that as well. So that's excellent.
Really exciting, and I can't recommend these things enough to people anyway. I mean, we're sort of colleagues in our work, and we're sort of being partners at sometimes with the work. Yeah. And I've loved working with you, and I can't wait for us to get back in the lab and do it together again.
I mean, this is stuff that will change your practice. It will change the way that you think about the body. It will change the way you think about movement. Even just seeing it in this way, it's not, it's unadulterated. You're not seeing a muscle all nicely trimmed up. I'm not giving you a theory about what I think it's doing. I'm showing it to you live, raw, as it's happened, opening stuff up. We've got a male and a female cadaver, so we can switch between bodies, and I can do stuff, prepare stuff in advance to show you as well. So you're really seeing it as it really is, rather than any sort of doctored version, excuse the pun, or trimmed up version. It's sort of, live and raw. Yeah. And there's soft fix. The cadaver's a soft fix, so there's all this kind of mobility and movement through the joints. The tendency is that with embalming, people either embalm them and so that they're stiff, or they think, you then have to go to fresh tissue or unfixed tissue, and that's not helpful, because unfixed tissue. Did you do some unfixed with me? Did you come to?
I have done some before.
Yeah, it's pretty rough, and it's all sloppy and wet, and that's not how our body is when it's alive. And so we do this light fix. And a slightly different way of doing it, which keeps all the joints very mobile and very pliable, and so you get a much more real look, if you like, at the tissue. So
I think, that was really quite remarkable to come across that, and the way that you've sort of concocted that fix with a colleague of yours. That was something else, because we could sort of maintain some of the tissues at different levels that we hadn't been able to do before, and that was really exciting, and also the mobility that it gave was quite incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible to see what can happen. The skin's nice and soft and liquid. The joints are all mobile. The fingers all move. It's an amazing method. It's not, it's from Ben Whitworth at the Dodge Corporation. It's got absolutely nothing to do with me. I just sort of follow his recipes, and he taught me to embalm, and I bought an embalming machine, and because people weren't doing it, I'd say, well, can you embalm this way for these classes? And they go, well, I don't think so. And so I had to get an embalming machine and do it myself. And that's really what's happened in places like Poland, where I've gone over and I do the embalming. So yeah, that's it's very exciting to have that. I will do what I have to do in order to do what I have to do. It's always been my ethos, if you like, whether it's a kitchen. There's nothing that's not my job. If the cleaner doesn't come and there's a toilet that needs cleaning or unblocking, then I have to do that, because it's my customer's experience that's at stake. And I expect kind of people to join me in that ethos. Everything is everybody's job. Let's get it done.
Great. That's a really good ethos. That's carried with me all the way through. So thank you for that ethos. Julian Baker, thank you very much for this. We'll put all your contact details at the end of this as well, so everyone will know how to get hold of you.
You can find me, just look up Julian Baker, idiot. I'm calling myself, you might like this guy, I'm calling myself an anatomy anarchist.
Okay, AA.
Gary, you're a star. You're thinking the way that the way that you've taken something and you run with it is amazing. You know, we both come from good, hard-working backgrounds. We're not academics, and it's incredible to see the dedication, the level of work that you put into stuff. And you're a leader. You know, that's what stands you out from the crowd, apart from your beautiful face. And your incredible physique. But seriously, what stands you out from the crowd is that you are a doer, you're a worker, you're a grafter, you travel, you work so hard, and it's great to see somebody that's sort of on that level, that you don't expect anybody to hand you anything. So I know that people that work with you and follow you get enormous value because you give the passion and you give 100% every single time, and that's great to see. So thank you for inviting me for the chat. It's great to see you.
My pleasure. We must do this again at some point.
Yeah, let's do it. I want to do it over a beer. I mean, socially distanced, beer.
Yeah. Okay, my friends, you take care.
Cheers, Gary. Nice to see you. Thank you. All the best.
Okay.